And I am a former pastor as well as a former Master's Commission director. I left about 8.5 years ago, and I've been an atheist ever since. I am a member of the Clergy Project. Today, I'm going to interview Verdell. He is a member of the Clergy Project as well. And he was involved in a few different denominations, and I'm going to let him speak to that. He was involved in campus ministries from 2003 to 2011, and then church ministry from 2011 to 2016. My name's Ashley, and I've been in the Clergy Project for about a year, but I've been an atheist for about 8.5 years. And left in 2013 and was an evangelical pastor. What about you?
Well, I found out about the Clergy Project, I want to say around 2000, maybe 18, 19. And so I joined then. I haven't been as active, but I've just been kind of looking for a place to be active. Just haven't really found a place to connect the way that I would like to, honestly. But for me, I went down a long Christian road. I mean, if we start from like the beginning of my Christian career.
Yeah. Do you want to kind of talk about maybe how you got into religion or how you got into the ministry?
Oh, absolutely. So, like a lot of Black people, you grow up around church, whether you want to be in it or not. And so I had a grandmother who was actually Seventh-day Adventist. And so that was my first exposure to Christianity. But I would say that my first exposure to religion for real, like in an in-depth way, was actually through Judaism. In my hometown of Asbury Park, New Jersey, it's predominantly Black and brown. But we have a lot of to be frank, a lot of white people who were just allowed to start being white. Yes, I grew up in Asbury Park, New Jersey, a predominantly Black, brown community. But like I said, we had a lot of communities of white people who were just allowed to start being white, in the 19th, 20th century or so. So a lot of Italians, Eastern Europeans, and Jewish people, Irish, all of that. And so that it was a very vibrant community. And plus, given where we lived, particularly if you lived in that town, you tended to be you had to be a bit of a more liberal white person if you were going to live around where we were at that time. And I don't know the same thing now with the beach being back up and everything. But Judaism, first my best friend growing up, and now still, her mom is Jewish. Her dad was Dominican. And so I first just, they would celebrate Hanukkah and Christmas, and I would get upset because I was like, I wanted extra gifts. But then I had a couple of teachers, particularly Miss Sloter, Miss Osubcheck now, she got married in second grade. She was Jewish, and we did Jewish things for Hanukkah. We learned, we played with the dreidel and we sang the dreidel song, and we understood that why they put the dash, they put God G-D. And so that was really my first, I would say, even before like a Bible study, way before any of that, it was that exposure. And that stuck with me because it was just like so much in the people. But clearly I did not go that route. So my grandmother was Seventh-day Adventist. And so I grew up around it. My mother wanted to go to church. And by the way, feel free to interject and ask questions because this part of it could go on. So please feel free to ask the question, stop, whatever, to ask for more clarity. Because this part can be sizable. But yeah, I don't know if it's the same thing, but particularly when I was growing up, in a lot of Black communities, if you were a young boy and you were articulate and seemed to be well behaved, it was like, oh, well, you're anointed somehow. And I was in those quite unfortunate gifted programs and all that type of thing. So it just kind of all blended in. But my grandmother was Seventh-day Adventist. I went to her church a few times, well, more than a few probably. Hated every
some of the key beliefs of Seventh-day Adventists. I guess I don't really know that myself.
well, one, they love the King James Bible. So in that regard, but I mean, Adventism has a whole long history in which I don't really know enough of to articulate. But one of the main things is that they celebrate the Jewish Sabbath, and they keep
Okay.
the particularly the Ten Commandments. Like they really are like the no shellfish, that type of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So my grandmother, Friday evening to Saturday evening, we had to stay over her place and to sleep over there, no TV, no nothing. And sometimes she would give us little Bible studies and things. Me being in the fantasy and cartoons and stuff, I liked the way they drew them. It was like, oh, look, it's this guy on a horse and the castle with the rainbow in the background. And so it wasn't so much that I was like ingesting, like, oh my God, this is God. It was like, wow, this is like a comic book. This is cool.
Yeah.
But I hated church. I said, first of all, it's hot. I don't like these dress clothes. Second of all, I don't want to be here on Sunday morning. Like I'm old enough to where Saturday cartoons were actually good, and you couldn't always record them. You know what I mean? It wasn't like it is today. It
Yeah.
was like, oh,
No,
we
you
missed it,
can't
you missed
or couldn't.
it. So I didn't like that. And I mean, I just was very observant as a kid. And I remember one time saying, grandmother, like, well, Nana, why should we go to church? You don't like the people there. You always talk about them. Why would I want to go? And I mean, I was known for saying things like that. I mean, also, I think other parts I think are helpful. I'm autistic and I have ADHD,
Oh,
which no one knew that then, way back when, but it makes a lot of things much more clear.
did you get diagnosed later?
Oh, way later.
Wait.
Like I was all but diagnosed in 2018, and then like with the big old stack of papers
Yeah.
and September of last year. But also they've said that, oh well, you also are ADHD as well and
That's
attentive.
interesting.
So that was yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry to like get sidetracked by that or anything, but yeah, I mean, I'm going for an assessment for myself, feeling like it was missed all those years, and thinking about it for my daughter, and my daughter's also ADHD. So it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like I don't I the reason why it catches my ear is because I don't know, it makes me wonder if there's like some sort of correlation with religion and things being ignored, being a part of the church and trying to
Well,
pray things away or
I think it's layered. I think you have to also get into the community aspect. Like I don't know how old you are, but I'm 38, and
I'm
so
36.
okay, so we're basically the same age.
Yeah.
So the time when we were in elementary school, first of all, they didn't call it ADHD back then; it was just ADD.
Yeah.
And for whatever understanding there is now, it was way worse back then. So I don't even think there was anything to pray away because no one even really knew what it was. You know what I mean? And so particularly back then, the way first, I don't know if the same other communities, but in for Black communities, the bad kids have ADHD. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
ADHD, and it's like you're running around, you're on Ritalin, and it's some white people stuff that you all that type of stuff. Autism, if you can talk, then you clearly are not autistic. The
Mm-hmm.
people in that mind, and so I mean, clearly we've come far, but also there was also in for Black communities, it's a fear of being labeled because that thing then it follows you because people were keenly aware of, if you, I mean, there are probably a lot of kids who maybe the parents knew something was up, but didn't want to go through that process because they didn't want their kid to be treated as less than. They didn't want,
Mm-hmm.
all that paperwork stuff can mean so much in those contexts, or maybe they saw the way the special ed program was treating kids and they didn't want to be put in there, even though you can argue that a gifted program, and even though the way it often is conceptualized and was executed was awful for everybody involved, even the kids who weren't involved, it actually is an accommodation. You know what I mean? You
Mm-hmm.
could argue that because it's like, yeah, this person needs a challenge, an appropriate challenge for them, and everybody is not on that same page. Doesn't mean that one is better than the other. That's why calling these group of kids are gifted, which automatically means these other kids are not.
Yeah.
I mean, just by that. So yeah, I don't think it was. What was noticed is that I was a special kid, that I was smart, that I read very well, like scary well, to the point where like it was like, how did you know that, or how could you do that? Had an amazing ability to retain information.
Yeah.
I'll never forget, there was this play. I used to act a lot when I was younger. There was this play, and I auditioned for the main part. It was a Christmas play. I wanted to be Santa Claus, but you know, I was in second grade, and that wouldn't have worked. But instead, I got the part of the narrator of the play, and so I had the most lines out of everybody in the thing. And so I had this big old book that we made, and little kindergarten sitting around, because I would read to the kindergartners every week in second grade, which looking back was an accommodation because I would finish my other stuff too early. I needed something else to do. So I would do
Yeah.
that. And so I memorized all of the lines, and I just acted like I was reading from the book. And so everybody, the adults would come and say, "Oh, wow, that's so cute that you're reading from that book." And they would see it. And it's like, well, there's nothing in here. And I'm like, why would there be anything in there? Like, I just had no awareness that that was a strange
Yeah.
thing to do. It was like, well, why not? Like, why wouldn't, like, can't you do this? Type of thing. It's like, I remember being very caught off guard by why people, because it wasn't just like oh, you're smart. It was kind of like, oh. And so this it's kind of mixed with this, wow, you're smart, but also it's like kind of, what? How are you? So it was that, but no one, I mean, yeah, no one noticed. No one, you know, they notice the traits, but they didn't know what to put. And the fact of being inattentive, people still think that even to this day, that ADHD is, you're basically running around bouncing off of the walls. And it's
No.
like, well, no, it can be differently. You can be inattentive. It's like me, I may be sitting still, but I just saw 5 different things in less than 3 minutes. But I'm
Yeah.
not bouncing around. And I know that for women, it's particularly under that. I mean, Black folks also are very
Yes.
underdiagnosed, but
Yes,
women in
too.
general are very often very much missed.
Yeah, a lot because of masking and, just the verbal part that you were talking about too. If you're not nonverbal, it's a lot easier to be looked over. But if you can carry on a conversation, or if you can look people in the eye, then at times, then you're it's very easy to overlook, I think.
Yeah, I think now, I mean, it's still rough. You know what I mean? It's still
Yeah.
very rough, but as rough as it is now, it was just that much worse back then. I mean, also, they had Asperger's then. And I'm pretty sure if I were like screened back then, they would have given me that like without thinking. But
Yeah.
now they've rolled that in. Like, I mean, Asperger's syndrome was autism then, but they had the separation of autism and Asperger's. So it was like one, like, this is the cool kind, you're Rain Man, and these are the people who really need the help. And these are the folks who can do all the math, and the folks who can't tie their shoes, kind of hierarchy, which I'm glad they done away with, because some days I actually do need help finding and tying my shoe.
I know, because there's a whole spectrum to it too. I mean, even just emotionally, or the breakdowns or things like that. Those are the things that maybe people aren't going to see, but they're still just as difficult. Yeah. So I mean, there's ups and downs in all these different areas. And so if somebody's verbal, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not struggling immensely in another area.
Oh yeah. I've had to explain that a lot of times to people, because a lot of people don't know and don't understand. And for a lot of times, I am either the first autistic person they've ever met, or the first one that they've met who's like me. And so I had a friend, and it was a question asked, and it was an honest question. It was like, we were at an event and I just did like a lesson. I led like a lesson, a keynote. And he was like, so, like, I understand that you're autistic, but can you explain to me why you can do this? Because that's just not my understanding. And so I said, well, think about it. I get to prepare a talk, and I get to dictate how this goes.
Exactly.
Information that I like, and people have to respond in ways that I set up. This is not like going up to somebody in the bar and having small talk, right?
Exactly.
This is where I thrive. I thrive in a situation like this, because I I get to control how we're talking and communicating. I get to set the rules for how we engage, and I get to prepare beforehand. So yeah, like, because of how, that's the thing, is like, in the right situation, I'm going to do something probably way better than a neurotypical person would. But because I do it better, when it comes time to asking for support, then it's very hard to convince people that you need it. Like, what my experience has been, when it's like, hey, I need help, people tend to think that means you need encouragement. And so it's like, hey, I'm really struggling making these doctor's appointments. I'm really struggling. And it's like, oh, that's okay. Everybody's afraid of the doctor. It's like, no, 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 you don't understand. I can't make this appointment. All of the steps that it takes to get to making an appointment, I cannot do. I am struggling with doing that. I need help doing that. Can you call and make this appointment for me, please? Why can't you do that? You know, it's like explaining, because people have this idea of things that are supposed to be easy and not. And we have the idea that we think that, for however flawed the idea of intelligence might be, we think that intelligence is across the board. So if you're really good at math, of course you'll understand chemistry. Or if you're really really good with philosophy, of course you'll be able to explain exercise science. We don't understand. It's like, no, you can't. It's like, no, this person maybe had a lot of money in business, but that does not mean they can be the president of the United States. Those are not the same, you know what I mean? But we act as if they are, so that all makes things worse. We spent almost we spent a lot of time talking about that.
I know, but I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sidetrack, but it was just interesting. I felt like, I don't know, I felt like that maybe somebody who comes across this might be in the same situation. Or did you go to Bible college?
So I will start there. So I went to divinity school and then seminary, and I think that's a very important distinction. So I'll just skip through when I like officially became a Christian, it was a particular brand of charismatic, non-denominational Christianity in like the early 2000s, which, you know, non-denominational was so prevalent then, it might as well have been a denomination. So Black church, charismatic, speaking in tongues, running around, all that type of stuff. And so I was involved in that for a while, felt the call to ministry. And even after I graduated from Rutgers in 2006, I was looking to like get training, because in my mind I was like, I need to get training, right? And so glad none of that worked out, because it would have been so bad, so awful. Because I was looking, remember IHOP? I don't know if people remember that.
Yes, like, IHOP, Misty Edwards.
Yes, all those type of folks, and like I liked it.
Me too.
The problem was, I think ultimately that's what led to my Christian downfall, because I actually took it too seriously.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't just something to say. It was like, okay, well, where is God? Where is he? Like where is it? I want to see it, because if I believe it, I should see it, right? And I think a lot of people who are Christians do not realize how a lot of what they say, they actually don't believe themselves. They just say it and believe it because it's what you're supposed to do. It's what everybody does. But it's like, no. Like, we prayed and they didn't get better. What happened? What do we need to do to make sure that the next time this happens, that like people don't think of it that way?
Isn't it weird that like we went so long and it didn't dawn on us that we were praying and they weren't being answered? Like, I mean, like, why didn't I keep like a journal of like, hey, I prayed for this, did it come true?
I think one thing is you get really good at the mental gymnastics. You don't realize when you're doing them, and in some cases, depending on what type of life you live, you can find it. I mean, a lot of times privilege looks like answered prayer.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
it does. And I mean, we're talking about race, but even, with myself in some areas, that's why I generally don't like the frame of privilege, because a lot of people have some privilege in some way. So it's like, at some point, it's way more nuanced than who has privilege. It's more about, okay, well, where is the oppression? And so it's like, well, yeah, I'm a college educated person who knows college educated people, connections, things like that. even though they may be hard, things tend to at some point come around for people in those positions. It may not be, I mean, sure, you can control for being Black or being queer or anything like that, but there's still a tendency, I'm not somebody without a college degree. I'm not somebody who was in the criminal justice system, like there's, you know, you think God is answering prayer, and it's just the fact that, well, you're lucky, and where you are and where your position currently in the world affords you way more good than bad, and the bad you could control to some extent. But yeah, I didn't notice I was naive, and I don't mean naive as in like blissfully, but just like, again, I was autistic and didn't know it. And so a lot of the social things I just was not picking up on. But the funny thing is, the social stuff that I did pick up on was always frustrating to other people, because I would notice their patterns and notice what they said and what they didn't say and what they really meant. And so that would get me in trouble a lot of times. So, but I wasn't indoctrinated.
Like, meaning you would kind of question motives, even like that kind of
yeah,
thing?
I would question things, particularly when I was in a Christian fraternity in undergrad, and even after I graduated. And leaders would say stuff, and I'd be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Or like, I did not have the thing in me where just because someone holds this position that I'm going to treat you differently. You know what I mean? I just was never that way, and nor did I ever expect that same type of treatment.
Yeah.
And so when people would be like, well, I'm so-and-so, I was like, oh, hey, like, I just wouldn't give it to them, because it's like, well, you're just a person, and there's a lot of things you're wrong about. I can point them out. So I understand that you're holding this role, but also of my view of leadership, I actually took it seriously. It's like, if you're a leader, you're supposed to serve people. If you're a leader, you're working for the people. So you're accountable to the people. And if you're asking them to do things without explaining why or how, that's domineering. That's dictatorship. And
or without willing to do it yourself.
Right. And that's people, that's not leadership. That's controlling, like that's domineering. And so again, another instance of me, but those are the unsaid, unspoken rules that someone like me won't pick up. And even if I pick it up, I won't care. It's like, well, no, I know this. I know you're pastor so-and-so. Like, and actually, so let's get back on that train. So I left, that didn't happen. And I moved to Maryland in 2006 with some of my fraternity brothers. It was the Great Recession, so I bounced around from all types of jobs or whatever. But I knew that I wanted to go to do seminary. And so one of my line brothers, a bunch of my brothers at that time were going to Howard University in DC. And one of my line brothers was actually going to Howard University School of Divinity. I had no idea they had a School of Divinity. And so I was like, oh, it's right here. I'm going to apply. Let's go. And I was in like, Black folks don't generally call themselves evangelical, but I'm going to call these Black evangelical churches, because, they were very cool. Had a lot of, a lot of urbanness to them in their own respective ways, would take like a Hillsong and jazz it up, great music, add, Hillsongs usually have like 10 words. They would add like 5 more, you know what I mean? And so, and great music, stuff like that, and engaging, whatever, cool. So I had no idea the differences, you know what I mean? I had no idea the difference between like a Bible college and a divinity school and a seminary. Actually, many people don't. In that regard. And so that was the first
to be honest, I can't say that I really know what a divinity school is.
Okay, so a divinity school, so a lot of it depends on whether or not you were accredited through like the education region. Bible colleges, they can be like, if you go to a Bible college and you can get a bachelor's degree or something like that, like it could, maybe they wouldn't call it a Bible college, but it's like a college that is basically Christian, like that can happen. But a lot of times too, when people say Bible college, it's just basically a deeper version of Bible study, pretty much. For a divinity school, and a lot of seminaries too, but not all the time, but most of the time, you're getting an accredited master's degree, like you're getting a master's of divinity or some type of master's degree, where you have to go through there's particular standards in order to earn that degree. And divinity school in particular is usually attached to a research university. So that's why like Duke Divinity School, Harvard Divinity School, Howard Divinity School, things like that. Now, a seminary can still give a master's degrees. They can still give those out if they're accredited, but they're usually attached to simply a denomination. Like after Howard, I went to Wesley Theological Seminary in DC, and they're a Methodist seminary. So that's why I still got another master's from there, but it wasn't attached to a research university, in that way.
So that sounds a lot more than what I did, because we called it a Bible college, and it was probably what you're explaining.
It's miles beyond, but I didn't know that, and I think this is where me not being like, look, I'm not going to sit here and act like I was not drinking the Kool-Aid. I didn't drink the cup down to the bottom.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. I would refill my cup, but I would never drink it down to the bottom. And I had enough life experience outside of Christianity that it was still always there. Yeah. You know what I mean? So like I did martial arts. I read Buddhism. I minored in religion in undergrad. I understood meditation. I understood Buddhism, and I understood that there were other things besides me. And so, of course, I'm sure I went way too far at various points in my Christian walk. Who hasn't? But there was still, I think, a restraining factor in me that a lot of other people did not have, that I just wasn't willing to, and that held me. I still said and believed some bad things about people. So not excusing that, but I do think there was some type of, I could only go but so far. And even if you're like, okay, look, okay, this is a sin. Do we have to treat them this way though? They're not doing anything to anybody. We can just leave them alone. They're not doing anything, right? Which is a huge step. Even that would be challenging for people to hear that be suggested. So the thing about divinity school is that it's not Bible study. You are not going there to edify your faith. It can happen, but you are learning like you're learning that the book of Isaiah was written by like 3 different people. There is no one Isaiah, and that the suffering servant is not Jesus, couldn't have been, talking about Israel, that, by his stripes we were healed, talking about that same servant. They're talking about Israel being injured and that their wounds are what's going to ultimately lead to the world's healing. It's not talking about some guy hanging on a plank of wood. You know what I mean? And so it's very difficult for a lot of people because that's jarring to them. But to me, I soaked it up because I just had that mind and I just was so excited. Like, this is so cool. But what I did not realize is the huge disconnect between what I was learning in school and what happened when I went to church. And so I remember one of the formative moments for me is when I was sitting, I used to sing on, the praise team, like, because, those times people love praise teams. I was sitting we had sung, this also was a theater church. So this again, telling
kind of fun.
I want to set the context of the times because, this was a little bit ago at this point. And so I just finished singing on the praise team, went to the back, got some water, came and sat down for the service. And the pastor was talking, good guy, but he was saying something, I forgot exactly what he was talking about, but he was talking something in Exodus. And whatever he was saying was completely wrong because I literally was in like Hebrew Bible that semester. And it just clicked to me. It's like, wait a minute, that's very wrong. Like, that's not it. That's not what, like, no one knows that. And it clicked to me that how am I supposed to take instruction from somebody when I know in 3 months, I know more about this one passage that he has ever encountered in his entire 20-year career in ministry? Like, how am I supposed to listen to him? And not like I'm smarter. It's just like, how does this work? It's like it was less about I'm smarter than you. It was more about the way this is set up. How does this work? Because I know more about this than you. like you're going to say beliefs, but I literally, like, I know, like I study this in a way, like I can read, and, as I progress through seminary, it's like, yeah, I can read Greek. What are you going to tell me about what a scripture says when you can't even read it in Greek? Like, what are you going to tell me? It's like, well, we have to follow God's word. Which one? Which thing? Like, like I understood how Bibles were written and translation was
Yeah.
done, some of it and all of that. And so when you learn, and again, being at Howard, it was a very Black experience, which I also appreciate. It gives you a different perspective on like Black theology and things like that. So I loved it there. And I loved soaking that up. So eventually I left the evangelical stuff. I went to the African Methodist Episcopal Church for a bit. I was there, but then ultimately left because of just some, it was obvious homophobia, but not like in, how do I, basically it was a pastor at the church that I was at, which is a popular church here in the area, sitting in the pulpit, and he was talking about how he was playing basketball, and then some dude came and whispered in his ear. He's like, "No, man, I'm not with that funny stuff." Then everyone started laughing. And so I was still processing my queerness at that time, but I knew that whatever I was, they were laughing at it. And within a month, I was gone. And so then I went to the United Methodist Church thinking that maybe that would be a difference. And it wasn't. I mean, that's where I would say I professionally came out per se. But when I realized where things were going, it was like, and it was stark. It was like, listen, I'm not going to sit here and let people tell me that I'm not qualified to serve and to minister. I know I am. Like, I preach better than most of the people in this room.
Yeah, more qualified than probably anybody else around.
Like, and I wasn't saying it because I was like, no. One of my mentors was a top homiletician, like two of the top known academic homileticians, and they both said they both were like, no, you have the goods, you need to do this. So it's like, no, I know full well that I am equipped, I have the skills, I have all this type of thing beyond preaching. So I'm not going to sit here and let someone tell me that I'm not worthy to do that. So then I left the United Methodist Church and I joined the UCC. That was a clusterfuck, complete.
Oh gosh, why?
Well, I think one thing
did you pastor in these positions?
So I was a minister for those. In the UCC, I was like local clergy, I guess is what you would call it. But that's another thing. My process to get to ordination where I could do that, it just kept being hindered by people and other situations. And it was a lot. It was a whole lot. And so eventually I ended up taking a church break. I was also back at Howard for a PhD program that ultimately I couldn't finish. And I guess getting back to the part where I think when I started going toward atheism, 2016, 17. And I think the one thing that's unique about my journey is that I was a progressive Christian when I became an atheist. And I think that throws people off a lot when they hear that. It's like, oh, wait, you were like with the fun God? Like the God who like go drink and have sex and gay is okay. And that's the God that you didn't find satisfactory? That's like, well, yeah. I didn't find, like, I found that there's more answers with that God than the other, more questions with that God than the other one. Personally.
Yeah, really? Because I always kind of figured if I ever went into the progressive route, it would have been a lot harder to get out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a couple of things. Looking back, like the way I think and process things would make that very challenging. Because again, I'm expecting stuff. Because I take it seriously. And I'm just like, well, God's going to deliver us. I was like, okay, so when? How many Black people are going to get shot in the street before God delivers us? I thought voting, you all said that, that we paid for voting rights and it was that God gave us voting rights. So why are they being taken away? Is God asleep? What is happening? And my questions started to get bigger and bigger. And even though I was in these progressive spaces, particularly with a lot of Black people in these progressive spaces, the questions began to get too big and people were not comfortable with them. And that was part of it. And then just things going on in my own life, my own situation around the world, all of that. I tried to keep my faith alive. I was like, no, I just generally don't believe this. But I thought that it was just maybe a drought, maybe something's going on. And so I could think of it as like a pilot light. I was trying to find something to kick it back on. But when I realized that Christianity was given to me in response to the trauma that I was going through as a child, as in, you're special. And, God has a special plan for you. And people who are special go through really, really hard things. Those hard things being, incredibly violent, physically and emotionally violent bullying, and all sorts of other just home life situations all over, all types of stuff. And so, yeah, that was what it was. And once I realized that no one forced me to go to church, but I was kind of wound up and pushed in that direction, then I stopped. I was like, nope, I don't believe, I don't believe this, because I think I owe it to myself to figure out, I want to be who I want to be. And I don't find any evidence. I don't find this evidence compelling anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Or about there being, I don't find it compelling. I'm not convinced. And I think the flaw with progressive theology is that it does not answer anything. And maybe that's unfair. Maybe that's an uncharitable way to put it. But it can do the service of yay, we can get gay married. Yay, sex is a gift from God. Yay, we can, advocate for, racial justice. All those things in themselves, I have no problem with. Yay, great. I wish more churches did it. But when it comes to answering the real nitty-gritty about God and God's existence and God's action in the world, it's just as bad as all the other ones that have the God at the center of them. You know what I mean? It's okay, why do bad things happen to good people if God is good? And you'll hear at some point some of the same answers that the right will give, that the more conservative places would give. And it's a belief. And I just think at that point in time in my life, and even now, I was like, well, no, that's not good enough for me. And I said, just if we're taking evidence, Black people, particularly Black women, are the most religiously observant group of people in the United States. You mean God didn't hear none of their prayers? None. God loves devotion, right? Look through the Bible. God loves it when people just say how amazing God is. Loves it to pieces. They do that all week. God didn't hear none of that. Why not? Trayvon's praying grandmother didn't get through. You mean all the people who got shot just so happen to not have a praying grandmother? It's just so many things where you have to ask the question. And actually, I read a book titled "Is God a White Racist?" And once I finished reading that book, it was in an Uber ride one summer. I knew it was only a matter of time, because he basically introduced that idea that basically any piece of evidence that you present as, oh, well, this is why God exists, can equally prove that either one, God doesn't exist, or that God actually does not like Black people, because the book was written at a time to critique Black theology in that time when it was first emerging. And so it's and after that, it's yeah, you could argue that God really likes white people a lot better than Black people. They win every time. I mean, at the very least, progressive goals are, and by progressive, we mean I don't know, medicine, simple, basic things. The vast majority of white people are Republican and Christian. They're getting a lot of wins. And if they don't win outright, they are certainly holding up the train. And so you have more evidence well, Trump got elected. And I mean, isn't that just so that God will qualify he will not call the qualified, but he'll qualify the called, is it a Darius figure or a Nebuchadnezzar figure? A foreign king who ultimately does God's bidding, and who's not a Jew, doesn't follow any of the laws, but God uses him to further the agenda that God has for God's people, to the point where they're called the Messiah. and viewed of as that, to giving the people back their land, which that they fits very well with a lot of white nationalist Christian thought. It's like, give us our land back
When you were
because you all are in the way.
What did you come out as gay while you were in the progressive churches?
So I was in the United Methodist Church. Actually, it's a very soap opera story. So like I was already out to myself, and there's quite a sizable contingent of like gay ministers everywhere, but particularly in the United Methodist Church. So there's that. But it got to a point when, at least at that point in time, my idea of ministry was integrity, and that I just did not feel comfortable at some point. I mean, yes, it was that part, like the pastoral part, where it's like I feel like I'm not telling the truth. It doesn't really feel good, which again, being for a lot of other people there, they're like, it's no big deal. And now I see it with more nuance than I did before, even though I would still choose the same thing, but I see it with far more nuance. It's really the institution's fault. It's not your fault if you are going through an institution and you find out about yourself, and this is how you eat, this is how you survive, and the institution is the one that's at fault here. And so there's nuances now that I understand I did not understand then, even though I would still make the same decision. But I just thought that integrity was the biggest part of why my ministry, if you will, was impactful. And I just couldn't reconcile those two. So like a week before my ordination process was probably going to start, I told my pastor, and then that was it. And so I left.
Wow, good for you. That was at the Methodist church?
Mm-hmm.
And so
at
then
the Methodist church, yeah. I was not out in the AME church. I was still kind of in the process of kind of figuring and guessing and wondering.
And so after that, so I'm trying to remember chronologically here. Mm-hmm. After that, it was when you went to the progressive churches? You ended in the progressive mm-hmm. churches? You called that the UCC, right?
Yes, United Church of Christ.
Mm-hmm. United Church of Christ. Yes. Okay. Yes, I've heard of that. Okay. So when you were there, did you kind of hid it a little bit there because you were trying to figure some of it out still?
Well, I wasn't hiding, because I mean, in my weird way, my way of figuring out wasn't like, and not, this isn't to insult anybody else who went the route of like, the apps and things like that, and or like dating and figuring out that way. I didn't do that stuff until I was like already like out, at least to myself, mm-hmm. And for me, it was important, and I've been on that journey for years and years and years. It was really important to me that if I made the decision, that I made it because I made it. And it was something that I understood, because I wanted to be fully aware, fully embrace the consequences. At least that's how I was thinking of it then. I did not want to be influenced one way or the other at that point. And again, this is my thinking then, which in some ways, though, I'm happy I did it that way, because I think that when I really stepped into it, I was older, than a lot of other people were at that time. I was like 29, 30. And so I was able to engage these things as an adult. Doesn't mean, it was still difficult and challenging because it was new, but I couldn't imagine being a teenager navigating that. It wouldn't have worked. And it would have given me yet another barrier to have to deal with growing up. So yeah. I'm kind of happy that it happened that way. But when I was in the United Methodist Church and seminary, I met some people who were just really helped me to really kind of process and sort through those things. And yeah, I remember the conversations, and it just helped me embrace who I was in that regard. But then it also helped me, sorry, I lost train of thought. Yeah, it just helped me to embrace who I was and stop like fighting it. You know what I mean? Like, and not that I was fighting, I think the main thing for me is I didn't have an example. Yeah. I didn't see anyone that I recognized, which I think is why we need more stories about people in these situations. At that point, I did not see anyone whose life resonated with mine, or that made sense with me and my experience at that time. And so that's why I was like, well, maybe I'm not, maybe it is Maybe it's just because me and my dad don't get along. Maybe that is the only reason that it'll be taken care of. Maybe, because it was like, oh yeah, I don't really want to wear a flower like in my hair or anything like that. Like again, I had these very rudimentary understandings of things.
Mhm.
And it wasn't so much that I was like, ew, I don't want to be that, but it was like, well, no, I don't talk like that. I don't say things like, I don't behave like this or do these things, not in a like, the gay lifestyle thing, but there is a gay culture, there is
Mhm.
a queer culture. And a lot of things that, the little bits and pieces that I saw, I just didn't see anything that looked like me. So I figured that it must just be something else. But when I saw someone who did resemble me, and resemble something that I could recognize, and when I understood that being gay is what I make it, and I would say queer now, I consider myself queer more than gay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, once I realized that, then it was like, oh, I can do this then.
So then there's a level that you don't feel like you missed out on being able to live the way that you wanted to live, or how do you feel about that now on this side of things?
No, I wouldn't have been able to handle it, and I wouldn't have had any support to sort through it. The one person who probably could have given me some support, um, they, that it was a family member, but that family member and other parts of the family were not getting along, and so that wasn't accessible to me. And given all the other things that I was dealing with, at school and at home, that would have just been one more thing, and I would have had no one around to help me. And given how starved I was to like someone to pay attention to me, for someone to like affirm me and say that I'm good, all it would have taken was some slightly older dude with the glit in his eye who has a lot of books, and I would have been gone. You know what I mean? And so I can handle myself in a way like when I was older, I could still had a lot to learn. It was like, what is going on? But I was an adult and I was able to do more things on my own as opposed to being 13 years old. Like that, looking back, I could see where this was a crush or whatever. But I think you have to also mix being autistic and stuff in there as well. So stuff was just different for me. And
Yeah.
so I would not change that. If anything, I would like to help create a world where someone like me could do that
Yeah,
with
I guess
support.
even more so then.
You
Yeah.
know
Like
what I mean?
what is life like now? How has life changed for you?
I do not have a rosy picture, and I think that's important to say. I think the same thing when they had the it gets better thing with like with gay people and everything like that. And it was like, no, not for everybody, not for a lot of people. For me, I pretty much had to start from zero. I had to start from zero. It was a rough time. A lot of the friends that I made, those relationships changed forever. One of them, actually, we came back around and we're actually talking again, so that's cool. But like it took years for that to happen. Um, Money, like my job, I was a PhD student and a pastor, and that was what I was training to be, and all of that was gone. So the friends are
Yeah.
gone, the career is gone, and I was also doing a lot of progressive Christian organizing, like in political space and advocacy spaces. Gone. That's gone. Um, it was really hard. And the most challenging part is that on the one hand, you have Christians who may be like super radical, super whatever, but still don't have a context to put you as someone who says they don't believe. So you're separated from that. Then, unfortunately, in the wider Black community, it's like atheists, that's white people stuff, which is like, well, no, there's plenty of Black atheists. Like Black atheism did not emerge from some European book like that. But then you also have the fact that so many people my experience was very unique. Actually, let me say that. I don't know if it was unique, but that there was no one around me who understood what that felt like. And so I was very alone. I was broke, sick, and alone. I mean, my partner was great through it all, You know, so great partner. Honestly, would not for him, it probably would have even been much worse. But even then, it's like sometimes even when you have support, you can still be in something because you have to experience it to be in it. It's like being a coach on the sidelines. You can say you can give plays and things, but if you're not on the field in the game, you know, it's just different.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it was very lonely, very isolating. Therapy was a wonder. And yeah, I mean, I just think that I mean, I'm in a better place now. I have, you know, a pretty good paying job. I get to use my writing and advocacy skills. A lot of the skills that I learned from divinity school and in ministry, I'm actually using now. So that's
That's
great.
great.
Um, but I think that, you know, people need support. And I think one of the things is a material reason why people don't leave. It was the same thing for when, like, for gay pastors and things like that we were talking about before. It was like, you're asking someone to come out, but then when are they going to eat? What are they going to do? You know? And so you have to meet people's basic needs have to be met. And, you know, I probably did it a bit recklessly, if somebody might say, but I didn't have any instructions. Who was I going to talk to about that? You know, there was no one around who could, yeah, who was going to help me? You know, who's going to really help me navigate that? No one. At least not that I knew then, because it was just so many varied aspects that were so vital to experience. What's somebody going to do? Nothing really. Um, so yeah, I mean, what I would say is that just people need resources. People need to see folks who look like them, sound like them, have a similar cultural experience, and have the resources to enable them to leave. Because a lot of people are preaching on Sunday morning who don't believe any of it, but they have kids to feed.
Yeah. It's